What has been the most horrible experience of your life? Story 1. Getting a message on MySpace, it was 2006, from my brother's boss asking if I had talked to him. This was a Monday and I had not talked to him all weekend, which was unusual, but his phone message said, "Hey, if I don't answer, it's because something is wrong with my phone." So I was not concerned. The second message said that he had missed a flight on Saturday to a conference. My heart dropped to my feet. I called her and told her to go to his apartment, as I knew what was wrong. My brother had epilepsy his whole life and always had seizures in the shower. I just knew he was in that shower. We lived 8 hours apart, so I felt helpless. I made the decision to call my mom, which was very hard because by calling her, I was acknowledging that something could be wrong. My mom quickly got on the ball, as I was an utter mess at this point. Sitting there waiting was horrible. She called me back about 30 minutes later and yelled, "What is your dad's number?" Several times in between me saying, "What happened?" Finally, she choked out, "He's gone." My whole world shattered with those two words. My awesome brother, my best friend, that shared history, was gone forever. He had a seizure in the shower and drowned on Saturday, 2 days before they found him. 2 hours later, my mom and I were on a plane to Chicago. It has been almost 7 years, and as I write this, it still doesn't seem real. I read this quote, "When you lose a parent, you lose your past. When you lose a spouse, you lose your present. When you lose a child, you lose your future. But when you lose a sibling, you lose your past, present, and future." This has always resonated with me. I am now an only child. Story 2. When I was 16, my brother, my dad, and I went to Los Angeles from British Columbia, Canada, to visit the lady he had been seeing for a while online, as they had met before when she came to visit us. We were there for Christmas and New Year's, and we had driven down in my grandparents' truck, as they had a car they usually drove. One morning, we could not find him. We figured he had gone out for a walk somewhere because he was not in his bed, and since her kids were there, they slept in different rooms, and the truck was outside. Plus, he had a bad temper sometimes and had lost his temper the night before. I was sitting in the remodeled garage watching a movie when I heard her start screaming and crying, then calling the emergency number. I sat there until some firefighters came and told me he had had a heart attack in the middle of the night and died. It was his second heart attack, and it taught me that it is not only overweight people who have heart attacks. He was about 150 pounds and about 5 feet 11 inches tall, I think. I had to go upstairs with the firefighter to tell my brother, who was confused because in Canada, first responders come with an ambulance, not a fire truck. That was hard. It was harder still to call my mom, as my parents were long divorced, and my grandma to tell them he was dead. My grandma was trying desperately to deny it, asking if I was my cousin, whose father had died a few years before, or someone pulling a prank. Fortunately, because of his poor health, my dad had the foresight to set up insurance just in case. Life insurance, mortgage insurance, and travel insurance. So we could fly back with his girlfriend as our escort. It has been almost 14 years, and thinking about that day is still really hard, especially since I did not really grieve for a long time. Story 3. It is a toss-up between getting divorced and seeing a man eviscerated. Divorce is terrible, no real explanation needed there. Concerning the evisceration, I will tell the story. I was out at a bar in an area where a fair amount of bar fights happened. They were usually only fist fights. No big deal, really. Once someone hit the floor, all involved parties were kicked out of the bar, and everyone just partied on. Pretty typical for Texas in the late 1990s and early 2000s. One night, the guy who hit the floor was not happy about getting beaten up in public. As the combatants were being kicked out, he drove a knife into his opponent's navel region and ripped it laterally until the blade tore free from the flesh. The man who had been stabbed just grabbed his intestines and fell to the ground, trying to hold his organs inside. The stabber leaned down, grabbed the other man's intestines, and pulled. He pulled out about 4 feet of internal organs and spit on the man's face. At this point, roughly 10 men beat the attacker severely and tied him up in a hog tie position with some guy's belt. Since seeing that, I have been unable to watch anything on television or film that has realistic gore, even though I know it is just an effect. Story 4. I was a 9-year-old girl, upstairs trying to sleep when I heard a lot of shouting downstairs, followed half an hour later by screaming. I went downstairs into the living room and saw my father pinning my mother to the couch, her hair clutched in his right hand, a knife in his left, pressed against her throat. I screamed, and he stared at me with the most murderous eyes I have ever seen. He jumped off her and lunged at me. I ran for the phone to dial the emergency services, but he punched me repeatedly and slashed me a few times until I fell, calling me a traitor, an accident, a disgrace, and a slut, before cutting the phone cable. He then had a dissociative episode, suddenly unaware of what was happening, overwhelmed with guilt after realizing what he had done. He grabbed a jerry can of fuel, poured it over himself and as much of us as he could, grabbed a matchbox, started shouting how much we had failed him as a family, crying, and sat there threatening to ignite everything. After my mother talked him out of it, he overdosed on his antipsychotic medication in a suicide attempt and ended up writhing on the floor before passing out. My mother took me to bed and tried to sing me to sleep with a hollow, trembling rendition of Let It Be, while we were both in shock, smelling of blood and petroleum. It felt like a twisted scene from a horror film. Story 5. While hiking with my significant other, it started pouring. A river we had to cross rose significantly by the time we reached it. This was the same river where one of my cousins and her boyfriend had drowned about 5 years before. He said he was going to check the river a bit further up while I was securing our 2 dogs to a rope. When I looked up, he was already gone. I didn't know which direction he went or if the river had taken him. Instead of coming right back to tell me his plan, he was gone for almost half an hour. In that time, I went through denial, anger, grief, and acceptance at least 4 times. I was ready to turn back the way we came and look for help when he reappeared on the other side of the river. Then he told me he had done something very foolish to cross and did not want to try it again, so I had to help him cross right there. Let's just say I almost lost him twice to the current during the crossing. One of the dogs somehow came loose and tried to help him. It was either him or her, so I had to let her get swept away. We found her downriver, unharmed. It was a horrible experience, but thankfully we can laugh about it now. Story 6. I was around 6 or 7 years old when I went with my dad to a deer lease to watch him hunt. One of the nights there, he parked his truck in the middle of a field and told me to stay inside, never to leave. He and his friends walked far off somewhere, though I can't remember what they were doing. It felt like an eternity just sitting there alone in the dark, feeling uneasy and unsafe. I hadn't eaten in hours and was getting fed up, so I decided to go find my dad myself. I hopped out of the truck and fell flat on the ground. Soon enough, I felt a stinging sensation all over the front and back of my body. Guess what I had fallen on? A huge cactus. I screamed in pain for 15 minutes straight until my dad and his friends came running toward me with horrified looks on their faces. Story 7. On February 14th, 1999, my girlfriend, now my wife, and I had just returned to her parents' house from a Valentine's Day lunch at the Olive Garden. We were 17 years old. Her parents were downtown enjoying their own Valentine's lunch. I remember telling my girlfriend I had a headache. She handed me a small cup with 2 Excedrin in it. Then the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw a towering man in a long beige trench coat with a local police officer standing behind him. The large man turned, nodded, dismissing the officer who left. He then asked if my girlfriend's parents were home. I said no, and he replied, "We've got some information about R," referring to my girlfriend's older brother. My girlfriend, now standing beside me, asked what was going on. The man repeated himself, and I sort of smirked at her, thinking it had something to do with her brother's recent minor legal troubles. I told the man, "You can tell us what's going on. I'll let his parents know." The man very gently said, "At about 4 o'clock this morning, R was shot, and he didn't make it." The world began spinning. My girlfriend collapsed, and we both began crying. After a few minutes, we realized the man was still standing at the door. He asked if he should wait to tell her parents and requested that I call them to ask them to come home. That was the hardest call I have ever made. I didn't actually tell them what had happened, just that they needed to stop whatever they were doing and come home immediately. My girlfriend asked that we not be there when her parents found out, as it was too emotional, so we left and returned shortly after the man had told her parents and younger sister. The following few days were a blur. Story 8. I was brutally assaulted a few years ago over the course of 2 days. I was placed into high-risk therapy, which is an intensive form of treatment used because about 80% of the cases referred to them carry a risk of ending in homicide. I was fired from my job because my performance declined, and I ended up living on a pull-out sofa at my mom's house. My high school sweetheart came and rescued me, taking me to a foreign country where he lived to help me regain control of my life and escape everything for a while. A few weeks into living abroad, I logged into his account to contact my family. His last conversation was open, between him and his recent ex, whom he had broken up with around the time he reached out to me. He was telling her how much he missed her and how he regretted his decision to bring me there, because I had baggage. He openly talked about the details of what had happened to me, something I barely wanted him to know about. I don't know what was worse, being betrayed by the only person I had truly ever wanted since high school, or losing all control of my life because of what happened. Story 9. 4 experiences in my life have been truly unbearable. My first wife attempting to take her own life for the first time, catching a girlfriend of 3 years cheating on me, my daughter dying in my arms while my wife and I tried desperately to rush her to the hospital, and then my wife emotionally abusing me, blaming me, and eventually divorcing me after our daughter's death. By far, the worst was my daughter dying in my arms. I can still feel her cries and gasps that woke us up, her weight as I scooped her up out of bed, her last raspy breaths growing weaker and shallower until they stopped, her head rolling limply against my shoulder, and the warmth from her body as it released itself. I remember holding her tightly, stroking her head, and telling her over and over again how much I loved her. It's a moment I never want to forget, just like I never want to forget every other moment we shared. It's been 2 years and I miss her every single day, her hugs, her smile, the way she would always run to me whenever I came to pick her up. Since then, even on my best days, life has felt like an empty shell. I am just waiting to die so I can see her again. Everything I love goes away. She was the one who loved me back. Story 10. On July 12th, 2012, I got a call from my mom while I was at work. I missed the call at first, but as soon as I saw "missed call mom" and the voicemail, I knew it wasn't anything good. I listened to the message before calling her back. Her voice quivered slightly as she calmly told me that I needed to leave work and come to the hospital. When I called her back, she said my siblings were flying in for a few days and that I needed to get to the hospital immediately. I remember standing outside my workplace, knowing exactly what was going to happen in the next few days. It felt like a cinder block had been placed in my stomach. I sat against the wall for a few minutes before going to tell my boss. I didn't even have to explain anything. He could tell from my face. He told me not to worry about coming back for a while. He had known my family my whole life and knew what was going on. My dad had been readmitted to the hospital with a failing liver. He had been on the transplant list for about 2 years. He was doing okay for a while until he got an infection he couldn't shake. I had tried to keep myself busy at work, trying not to think about the fact that he was now on a ventilator. During the hour-and-a-half drive to the hospital, the local one couldn't treat him, so he was moved to the big hospital in Rochester. All I could think about was how grateful I was that our last conversation a week earlier had been a happy one. Beyond that, I was on autopilot. The hospital scene was grim. Everyone was solemn and stone-faced, except for my mom, who had clearly been crying before I arrived. It stayed that way all day until we went to my aunt's house. The next day, we had a meeting with the doctor, who told us there was nothing more they could do. My father couldn't handle a transplant because of the infection, and his body couldn't fight it off anymore. We had to take him off life support. We said our goodbyes, tears streaming down our faces, and signaled for the nurses to proceed. I will never forget those 5 minutes, watching my dad, my hero, slowly drift into nothingness. The doctor assured us we made the right decision because my dad passed quickly once the support was removed, meaning he was ready to go. That didn't mean the rest of us were ready. The 2.5 years of his illness were filled with some of the most painful moments of my life, but I would relive every one of them just to hear him laugh again. Story 11. It's a tie between two experiences. The first was laser eye surgery, known as photorefractive keratectomy. They numb your eyes with drops, then place a small circular device filled with fluid to remove the top layer of your eye. Next, they use metal instruments to scrape off the remaining surface. Then they squirt more solution into your eye. The doctor places his hand on your forehead and says in a serious voice, "Watch the red dot. Do not look away. Do not move a muscle." The laser starts and you can smell your eye burning. Your vision turns dark and spotted, the red dot drifting. You wonder, do I follow it? Do I stare straight ahead? I just follow it, hoping I'm not making things worse. Then it's over. Time for the second eye. The other experience was when I was 12 years old and got hit by a car. I was riding my bike across a crosswalk, and the driver was going faster than I thought and wasn't paying attention. I don't remember the impact, just lying on the road, unable to move. I thought I was paralyzed. I screamed every curse I knew, which was quite a few thanks to watching a few episodes of South Park in its first season. Slowly, I regained movement. My leg was one huge bruise, and I had a deep cut on the back of my head where I hit the pavement no helmet. I was just happy I could move. I still have a bump on the back of my head from that day. Story 12. I drove 900 miles the day after graduation, spending all my open house money just to be with my girlfriend, who had moved away a year earlier. We had planned this for a long time. I had a job lined up there, had been accepted to the local university, and was looking at apartments. We talked every day, saying we were still in love and had just been torn apart too soon. What she failed to mention was one huge detail. She had a boyfriend living with her. I found out shortly after walking through the door. I hadn't driven my own vehicle. I rode with her dad, so I was stuck there for 2 weeks until he had to drive back home for work. I tried to stay civil and not lose it, even though I had every reason to. Mostly I just got drunk and smoked with her boyfriend. He was a decent guy, oblivious to the situation and just doing what anyone in his position would do. Still, 2 weeks of sleeping on the couch while that guy was with the woman I loved was pure torture. I never really told her how messed up what she did was. I just smiled, left, penniless, heartbroken, and lost. Story 13. 5 years ago, I was at my then boyfriend's house for dinner when I got a phone call from my dad. He said my mom and sisters had been in an accident about 4 hours from home and that we needed to go to the hospital. The ride there was oddly calming because I had this feeling everything would be all right. I remember getting really tired, and my last thought was, what would I do if someone in my family died? Well, at least I'll have my youngest sister to help me through. It never even occurred to me that she could be hurt. I woke up a couple of hours later when we pulled up to the hospital. My dad had my brother and me wait in the waiting room for half an hour with my extended family. I don't know how I didn't realize something terrible had happened. I just couldn't imagine life without any of them, so it didn't make sense that we could continue as a smaller family. It just couldn't happen. My dad brought my brother and me into a small doctor's office and told us that my youngest sister had died. My brother immediately started crying, but I just went numb. I felt like my life had lost its meaning. As the oldest, I had always taken care of her like a second mother. I picked out her clothes, did her hair, took her to the mall, taught her to read, and even helped change her diapers when I was 6. She was 5 years younger than me, but we were closer than anyone else on earth. I have still never loved someone as much to this day. The hardest part was going to see my mom. She had a broken rib, a punctured lung, cracked vertebrae, and was hooked up to all kinds of machines in the intensive care unit. As soon as we walked in, she tried calling for me, but could hardly speak. I went to her side, and she started crying, saying, "I'm so sorry this happened to you. I'm so sorry." My mom knew I would take it the hardest. She told me, "You know how you took care of her for all those years? Now it's her turn to take care of you. She's your angel now." I went numb for a few years after that. I'm only now beginning to truly grieve. It's been 5 long years, but it still feels like yesterday that I could walk down the hall to her room and wake her up for school. I miss her every day. Story 14. My mom was with a man who was violent and cruel, and one night they got into a huge fight. She had been drinking, so she decided to take me, her 13-year-old son, to a hotel to get away from him. On the way there, she got pulled over. Being stopped for driving under the influence with your child in the car is never good. She ended up asking my dad to take care of me. My parents had divorced when I was 5, and for a few years before that, my dad and I hadn't spoken because he wasn't a good father. He also hated my mom and could never let go of grudges, always focusing on her mistakes while ignoring his own. Within the first couple of days of staying with my dad, things were already hard for me, especially since I didn't like him. Then he got a call saying my mom was in the hospital. We went there and found out she had attempted to take her own life. Being there with my dad made everything worse. To his credit, for the next 3 or 4 months after that, he managed to be a decent dad before slipping back into drinking, substances, and verbal and emotional abuse. But going to see my mom in the hospital after her suicide attempt was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. Story 15. My mother had recently passed away from cancer, and as a means of coping, I became hopelessly addicted to synthetic substances. I was smoking between 3 and 10 grams per day and never allowed myself to come down for any reason. I had used it occasionally before her passing for a so-called legal high, but I had never abused it the way losing her led me to do. After about a month, I found one particular product called Ultimate and began purchasing 10-gram jars of it for $30 each, and my consumption increased tremendously. Ultimate gave me a high I had only ever experienced from the strongest strains of marijuana. Even though I knew how bad synthetic substances were for my body and mind, I continued relentlessly, bombarding myself with higher and higher doses. Once my consumption reached about half a jar a day, 5 grams, I suddenly developed an inexplicable fascination with contact juggling. I could pick up any object and immediately sense its center of gravity, understanding its contours and manipulating it effortlessly across my body or through my fingertips at high speed in ways that amazed both me and my friends. I would get lost doing this for hours, sometimes even days, juggling my small but heavy metal pipe, lighters, knives, even wooden staves at one point. After 2 weeks, I concluded that my skills seemed directly tied to how high I was, so my consumption ramped up even more, to a full jar per day. To top it off, I started using a balloon to inhale each hit multiple times. I wasn't disappointed by the results. My coordination skyrocketed, and I fell deeper into this trance-like state. At one point, I became convinced that I was moving objects so quickly they were building up heat and even emitting light. Friends would come over and I would try to interact, but I was completely lost in my haze, unable to tear myself away from juggling. I spent about a month like this before the episodes began. While focused on manipulating an object, I would suddenly snap back to reality, my awareness struggling to catch up, while my mind raced at hyperspeed to the rhythm of the motion. The first time it happened, I believed my bedroom was about to be sucked into a massive wind vortex that would destroy everything. I didn't know why, but I was certain it was about to happen. I dove for the doorway, trying desperately to escape an imaginary disaster. Hitting the floor snapped me out of it. I didn't smoke again that night, but I was right back at it the next morning. The second episode came while I was sitting in my garage. I had just smoked a large bowl of Ultimate, huffed each hit through my balloon, and started juggling. I'm not sure how long it was before it started, but I stopped just in time to feel it coming. Terror slowly enveloped me, a shroud of pure horror closing in. "You're fine. There's nothing wrong. You have nothing to be afraid of," I repeated to myself, but my words did nothing. The panic overtook me. I started walking toward my room, then running as dread consumed me. The feeling was like being a small child chased by a monstrous wolf, irrational, but overwhelming. I knew it wasn't real, but it didn't matter. I ran to my room and collapsed beside the bed, waking my girlfriend, who spent the next 2 hours calming me down and guiding my breathing to make sure I didn't stop altogether. The fear of not breathing became my greatest terror throughout that episode. It scared me enough to stop using for several days, but like a fool, I went back one last time. My routine began again: smoke a bowl, reuse each hit through the balloon, and juggle my pipe. After about 4 hours, 2 bowls an hour, the third and final episode struck. I abruptly stopped juggling, dropped the object, and stood up. My vision seemed to expand, my focus and peripheral vision fused, and my head felt clearer than ever. Like a man possessed and utterly intoxicated, I stumbled outside, my body barely cooperating while my mind raced. Thoughts flooded in endlessly, an overwhelming sense of infinite possibility, like I could think every thought in existence at once. It was exhilarating and terrifying, as if I had found the meaning of creation itself and dove headfirst into the heart of something divine, desperate to share it with the world. I made it outside and leaned against my car, but then I realized that thinking every possible thought all at once was unbearable. I started counting everything, the hairs on my head, the leaves on the trees, the blades of grass, the links in the neighbor's fence, then breaking each one down into smaller and smaller parts. As panic rose, I became aware of the vastness hidden behind everything, behind all existence. I wanted to flee, but there was nowhere to go, no escape from the immensity of it all. I closed my eyes, it didn't help. I opened them, it got worse. Terror engulfed me again. I needed to run, but had nowhere to run to. So, like a fool, I looked up into the night sky. Story 16. Viral meningitis was pretty nasty. I was a normally fit and healthy 20-year-old man when I went to the doctor for 3 or 4 days in a row, complaining of a headache and back pain, until eventually I saw a different doctor and was rushed to the hospital with a very high viral load. I was hospitalized for about a week, during which time I had 2 lumbar punctures after a student doctor messed up the first attempt, and I was given push-button morphine for the pain I was experiencing. When I was discharged, I couldn't stand, sit, or even raise my head from a horizontal position without suffering blinding headaches. This continued for about a month, during which I was on the strongest codeine tablets available. Over the next few weeks, my condition slowly improved, and I was weaned off the painkillers, but that bout of meningitis completely drained me for nearly 6 months before I finally felt back to normal. Story 17. Through college, I worked as a resident assistant to save money since it came with free room and board, and I was pretty lenient with my residents because I believed my job was to keep them out of trouble rather than throw them into it. Before my junior year, I proposed to the love of my life, and she said yes. I had never been so happy. Throughout the year, everything was great. We had a dog. We talked every night over video calls before bed, and life felt perfect. Around May of my junior year, she began acting strange, forgetting our nightly calls or even simple goodnight messages. Thursday nights were always tough as an RA at a party school because whoever was on duty had to stay up until 3 in the morning, making rounds, quieting parties, and helping drunk students get to bed safely. One Thursday night, I couldn't reach my fiancée. Her phone was off, and she wasn't answering. I started worrying, thinking something was wrong. At 3 in the morning, I packed up my things from the office and started heading to bed when a girl came running toward me, frantic, saying someone was in the girl's bathroom stall and not responding. I assumed it was another drunk student who had passed out and that it would mean another ambulance call. I followed her to the bathroom and saw a pair of shoes under a stall door. I banged on the door several times and called out, but there was no response. I climbed onto the toilet of the next stall to look over the door and saw her head in the toilet. I instantly did everything I could to break the door open. After several violent kicks, it gave way. The girl couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, 18 years old, her face submerged in vomit-filled water. I pulled her back, lifted her head, and realized she wasn't breathing. Her body was limp, her eyes rolled back, her face the color of a plum. I turned to the girl who found her and could only say, "She's not breathing. Call the emergency number." There I was, alone, covered in vomit, holding this unconscious girl and thinking about her parents. Would I have to tell them? Could I have gotten there sooner? I shook her, patted her back, praying something would happen, and then she suddenly gasped. Water and vomit poured from her mouth and onto me, but that breath was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. She was still unresponsive when emergency medical personnel arrived, and they told me she had been about 30 seconds away from brain damage or death. I wrote the incident report and told my boss what had happened. He could see how shaken I was and told me to take a few days off, that he would talk to my professors. He said, "Go see your fiancée." I tried calling and texting her again, but there was still no response. It was late, so I brushed it off and tried to sleep. After a few hours, I decided I needed to get away. I called her again. Nothing. It was Friday and I drove 3 hours to her parents' house. She always went there on Fridays to get things done and prepare for work over the weekend. We both worked weekends at the same store to save money for our place after graduation, which was just a few weeks away. When I arrived, she wasn't there yet, so I went inside and had a beer with her dad. He noticed something was wrong, and I told him about what had happened the night before. He was stunned and asked how his daughter felt about it, but I admitted I hadn't been able to reach her. When she got home, I hugged her and said how relieved I was to see her, that she wouldn't believe what I'd been through. She was strangely cold. I told her about the incident, how scared I was, how awful it had been, and she stayed distant. Then she said, "I need to tell you something." My heart sank. I already knew. It was like her face had a sign that said it. Then she said the words that burned into my memory forever. I slept with someone. Everything stopped, sound, movement, even my breathing. My mouth went dry. Not even 24 hours after the worst night of my life, my fiancé confessed to cheating with someone I knew. Someone who knew us. I tried to deny it, but then she twisted the knife further by saying it had been going on for a while. I stumbled to my car in shock and drove back to school in a daze. I bought a bottle of rum, drank it all by the river near campus, and blacked out, hoping to drift away and never wake up. A friend of mine, who knew about everything, came looking for me after I didn't answer my phone. He knew that spot was where I went to think. He found me face down near the water in my own vomit and brought me to the hospital, saving my life. I woke up hours later in the emergency room, full of IVs, told I had my stomach pumped and wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. In just a few hours, everything I had planned for my life had collapsed. It took me more than a year before I could even think about dating again, and I still struggle with trust. I'm terrified of saying I love you to my current girlfriend of over a year, and I'm writing this all down now, hoping it will finally be cathartic because I can't carry it forever. Story 18. Probably going on a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was the worst experience of my life. I was only in the training center for a week, but it was absolute hell. I didn't eat for the first 2 days because the food was terrible. No matter how much I tried to convince myself to stay, I just didn't want to be there. The more I expressed that I wanted to go home, the more I was pressured to stay. When I finally called home, nobody seemed to care. They just told me I needed to stay. Eventually, I broke down completely and demanded to be released, and they finally let me go. The next 3 months were miserable. I wanted to end my life. Everyone I knew looked at me differently. My mom even begged me to publicly apologize at church for letting everyone down. It was humiliating. My now wife's bishop told her to leave me behind because I was going nowhere in life and that she should already be married and starting a family. She was only 21 at the time. Story 19. I held my fiancé's hand as she took her last breath after undergoing laparoscopic surgery so the doctors could determine how far her cancer had spread. It had spread everywhere, and the shock from the surgery was too much for her body to handle. She died a month before her 32nd birthday. Before this, the doctors had told her she would most likely need a full hysterectomy, which devastated her because she wanted children so badly. She had to face the reality that we would never have biological children. It's been almost 3 years, and I still miss her deeply. Before losing her, the worst experience of my life was coming home to find my dad dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Life really does get unbearably cruel sometimes, but you can't let it destroy you. You just have to push through and believe that things will eventually get better. They always do, somehow. Story 20. When I was 9 years old, I was walking home from school, and during that 10-minute walk, I suddenly became very sick. It felt like the flu, but it hit me fast and hard. I had severe, uncontrolled asthma back then, and by the time I reached my front door, I was crawling because I could barely breathe. The cold air was attacking my lungs and my fingertips were turning blue. I had a nebulizer, which I grabbed and took to bed with me because I was too short of breath to sit up. I used the nebulizer with steroid medication for about 3 or 4 hours straight until my stepdad came home. The first thing he noticed was that I hadn't done my chores, and he was furious. He stormed into my room, yelling because the dishes were dirty. He grabbed me by the hair and dragged me into the hallway. Still holding my hair, he lifted me off the ground and grabbed my ribs with his other hand, pressing me against the wall. I was tiny and his hand covered almost my entire abdomen. He squeezed harder, yelling at me, and demanded to know why I was in bed using my nebulizer instead of doing chores. I finally managed to gasp out that I couldn't breathe, my words breaking between desperate attempts for air, partly because of my asthma and partly because he was crushing my ribs. I'll never forget the look on his face when I said that. It was pure hatred. He wanted me to die. His eyes were cold and murderous. Then he squeezed even harder, got close enough that I could feel his breath, and said, "Do you want to know what it's like not to breathe?" He let go of my hair, covered my mouth and nose with his massive hand, and started suffocating me. He was trying to kill me. The panic was overwhelming. I clawed at his hand, terrified, until I started losing consciousness. Then he finally let go and threw me down the stairs. My baby sister was at the bottom of the stairs and saw everything. I got up, went to the kitchen, and did the dishes. I don't remember much else that night. The next morning, my mom took me to the doctor, who immediately started shouting at her when he saw my blue lips and fingertips, and called the emergency number. I don't remember the first few days in the hospital because I was in a substance-induced coma while they stabilized my lungs. My stepfather was never held accountable for what he did. I've given birth to 2 children, suffered countless migraines, a spinal headache, a car accident, and emotional trauma and abuse. But that moment remains the worst of all. It's impossible to describe what it's like to look into the eyes of someone who, at that very moment, genuinely wants to end your life. Story 21, I watched a 4-year-old child get run over and die in the road. I was waiting at a traffic light on foot, and a family group was standing next to me. They had bags from the Early Learning Center, a children's store in the United Kingdom. Both our groups arrived just before the signal changed from the green man to red, and the grandmother in the family managed to jog across just in time. When the lights changed and cars began to move, the child suddenly darted out into the road, trying to cross. I wasn't really paying attention because I was lost in thought, but I remember thinking abstractly, "Oh, he'll just get through the gaps between the cars," as if he were an adult making a rational choice. It was a 3-lane road. He made it across the first lane, but when he reached the far side, he saw a car coming and froze. The corner of the car hit him, sending him flying into the near side of the middle lane. The mother screamed, "Jamie, no!" I will never forget that scream. I have never heard such raw anguish before or since. Then a 4-wheel drive vehicle ran over him. He was directly beneath its right side wheels, and both the front and rear wheels went over him. Badum, badum. The mother screamed again, "Oh my God!" He was lying in the road, his blood shockingly bright red. I was the first to react, running out to stop the cars. I thought about trying first aid since I had some training, but I realized touching his broken little body would only make things worse. While the police and ambulance arrived, I stayed with and tried to comfort the driver of the 4-wheel drive. She was a mother herself and was devastated, though there was no way she could have seen it coming. It was my 20th birthday. Story 22. When I was about 10, my mom, my brother and I were driving from New York to Florida. My grandmother lived in Maryland, so we decided to stay the night there before continuing the trip. When we arrived, she was busy cooking and baking for us. I remember there was bread absolutely everywhere, even piled on the guest bed. We couldn't find her anywhere in the house, though. It turned out she had slipped while getting out of bed, tangled herself in her sheets, and died on the far side of the bed, still wrapped in them. I don't remember who found her first. All I remember is my mother wailing over her body while I tried to tell the emergency dispatcher our address. There was no blood, nothing gruesome, just my mother's unbearable grief. Seeing her like that was the worst thing I've ever experienced. I couldn't bring myself to do anything to comfort her. The paramedics said we were strong and that sometimes grandchildren don't fully grasp what's happening. But I knew. I just couldn't process the depth of my mother's pain. From that day forward, I've tried to be the best, most open son I can be. I can't imagine ever being that emotionally disconnected from her again. Story 23. It was the first year that the 2 high schools in my county had been consolidated. The 9th and 10th graders were in one school, and the 11th and 12th graders were in the other. I was in ninth grade. The two high schools had previously been mortal enemies. One was wealthy and stuck up, the other poorer but full of good people. Many fights had broken out over this rivalry. In the first week alone, there were 36 fights. I live in a rural area, so everyone knew about it. One day, a kid came to school with a red backpack that had a sun on it, the color and mascot of the poor school. Three guys jumped him and tore his backpack in half. Other fights broke out over girls. One guy punched another for getting his girlfriend pregnant. The other retaliated, shoving him into a display case and cutting him up badly. A police officer stationed there to protect students approached the guy still stuck in the glass and tased him. I'll never forget seeing that kid convulsing with shards of glass sticking out of his arms. He even wet himself. Later, I found out that the police officer was related to the guy who had thrown the first punch, and that's why he tased the other kid. But even that wasn't the worst fight I ever witnessed. I was standing in the lunch line one day, two people behind a kid with Asperger's. He was near the hand sanitizer dispenser outside the serving area. When he pressed the nozzle, it was broken, and instead of landing on his hand, it squirted into the eye of the person behind me. I turned around to apologize for him. His name was Josh, and he was my friend. But before I could say anything, I was shoved to the ground by a tall, muscular kid who was charging toward Josh. I knew what was going to happen. I tried to yell for him to stop, but I had the wind knocked out of me. What I saw next has haunted me for the rest of my life. The angry kid started punching Josh in the back of the head, then slammed his face into the corner of a brick wall. He turned him around and beat him in the face, screaming, "Say you're sorry, you pathetic loser." Josh mumbled, "Sorry," his face soaked with tears. The other boy kept hitting him, knocking him to the floor, then kicking him repeatedly in a spiral. He grabbed his arm and pulled until it dislocated, then kicked his face until it was just a bloody mess of flesh. There was blood everywhere. The lunch ladies were laughing. They were actually laughing while I threw up on the floor. When the police arrived, they arrested guess who, Josh. He left in handcuffs with a broken nose, a cut eye, 7 broken teeth, a dislocated arm, and a punctured lung from a broken rib after being kicked in the chest over and over. The boy who did this to him got his lunch, sat with his friends, and was cheered on. I told them off. I said, "You sick idiots. That boy only tried to clean his hands and was almost killed for it. You're cheering for a psychopath who thinks violence is justice." Not the most eloquent thing to say, but I was furious. One of the attacker's friends was in my class, and he knew I never said anything unless I meant it. So thankfully, I didn't get beat up. A few days later, Josh still hadn't returned to school, and witnesses were being questioned. I was never asked to testify because I couldn't handle even thinking about it. I'd get sick every time. The whole experience changed me. Now I can't stand it when anyone talks about wanting to watch a fight. I've broken up with boyfriends over it. If you enjoy watching meaningless violence or think it's entertaining, you're an idiot. There's nothing fun about attempted murder. Story 24. My best friend moved to Colorado between 7th and 8th grade. During that time, he met new people, as anyone would. We stayed in touch, and through him, I got to meet his friends online. One of them was a girl named Marley. I know it sounds silly because we were so young, but I was absolutely floored by how beautiful she was. We hit it off immediately, which was rare for me, especially with someone like her. I was just an average-looking, nerdy kid, but she made me feel seen. He introduced us on January 12th, and for the next few months, we became incredibly close. Every day at 6 in the evening, she would get online like clockwork. She trusted me more than anyone else, though I'll keep her secrets private. Around springtime, I found out she had been hospitalized for 2 weeks after a suicide attempt. I didn't know how to react. The group I grew up with had their share of emotional struggles, so I foolishly brushed it off. When she came back home, we continued talking like nothing had happened. Maybe that's why she liked me, because I gave her a space free from judgment. I think I truly loved her by the time fall came around. She never got boring, never made me feel small. She gave me confidence, made me feel like I had a personality worth sharing. On October 18th, we talked on webcam late into the night, like we always did. Something felt different that night. She seemed lighter, freer. Around 2 in the morning, I said I was going to bed. I vaguely remember her saying, "Please don't," as if she wanted me to stay. She ended the call by saying, "I love you. Goodbye." I can still see the look in her eyes when she said that word, goodbye. I didn't catch the meaning behind it. To this day, I wish I had. The next evening, 6 o'clock came. She always got online at 6, but she didn't. I got worried, sent her messages, but never got a reply. The following day at 5, I was sitting at my computer when I got a message from a mutual friend, someone I barely knew. It said, "Marley is dead." I didn't break down. I didn't cry. I just felt nothing. It wasn't sadness or denial. It was emptiness, as if part of me had been ripped away. That feeling of nothingness was worse than any pain I've ever felt. That was 6 years ago last Saturday. I don't remember if I ever cried, but even now, thinking about it makes my eyes well up. I know others have gone through worse, but this was my scar, something I carry from when I was 13 years old, and it's something I never want anyone else to feel. Story 25. The worst moment of my life was waking up in the middle of the night, 12 weeks pregnant, to find blood everywhere. At first, I thought I could just clean myself up before waking my husband. I stumbled down the stairs into the bathroom, where the bleeding got worse, so much worse. Within minutes, the bathroom looked like a murder scene. The cramps were unbearable, and I couldn't even walk. I screamed for my husband, praying I wouldn't wake our other kids. My male roommate heard me first. He came into the bathroom, turned pale, nearly vomited, and ran to get my husband. The ambulance ride felt endless. At the hospital, they triaged me quickly and shoved me into a room with a specimen cup, telling me to give a urine sample. My blood pressure was 60/30. I was in shock, already grieving the child I was losing, and completely alone because my husband had to stay home to find someone to watch the kids. Yet they wanted me to walk to the end of the hallway to provide a sample. I just sat there on the bed crying, surrounded by a steadily growing pool of blood, while people walked by and stared. When my husband finally arrived, he had to carry me to the bathroom. That's where I finished the miscarriage alone in a hospital bathroom, collapsing onto the floor, almost passing out in the blood. Story 26. I'm a musician from a small town in the Midwest, and I had just landed my first session gig in Los Angeles. I booked a flight and was supposed to stay with a friend of a friend. When I landed, my ride was late, but eventually arrived, and we went to a bar near the ocean to grab food and a few beers. While there, I saw that my dad had posted a picture on social media of the place where we used to smoke cigars and fish. The caption read, "Nice resting place. Bye, y'all." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what was happening, but was too afraid to face it. I called his phone, no answer, so I left a voicemail begging him to reconsider. Then I called my mom, who was still at work and didn't know anything. I asked her to check on him, then called my brothers to tell them my fears. They told me to calm down, that it was probably nothing. A few beers later, my mom called back frantic. "It doesn't look good. We found a note." I told the friend of a friend I needed to get to the airport immediately, but she just shrugged and said, "There's nothing you can do until you get a flight. Can you just hang out here while I go to yoga?" We stopped by one of her friends' houses and they asked if I was okay. When I told them what was happening, they offered me a pipe to relax. I assumed it was marijuana. It wasn't. I don't know what I smoked, but I started hallucinating, wandering aimlessly through Los Angeles neighborhoods. I eventually stumbled upon a building where an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting was happening, and those people, complete strangers, took me in. They calmed me down, gave me water, and talked me through my panic. Once the high faded a little, I called the friend of a friend again. She had gone to a party but gave me the address. I walked 3 miles to find her and arrived to see her and her friends bent over the biggest table of substances I'd ever seen. I begged her to help me get to a hotel near the airport. In hindsight, I should have just called a cab, but I was frantic. She told me to chill out and handed me the keys to her Lexus SUV. I drove to a hotel near the Los Angeles airport, half drunk and still hallucinating, charged a room so I could finally feel safe, and called the airline. They were incredibly kind, thank you, Southwest, and immediately rebooked me on an early morning flight home. It was around 4 in the morning by then. I left the Lexus keys at the concierge desk with her number and took the airport shuttle. After a 4 or 5 hour flight, I got home and had to console my mom. They had found my dad in our old fishing spot from the picture he had posted. He had shot himself in his truck. Later, I checked his phone. He had listened to my voicemail. I helped plan the funeral, and afterward, I had to drive his truck half an hour to my brother's house, with towels on the seat so we could pressure wash the blood from inside. I lost the Los Angeles job, but honestly, none of that mattered anymore. Story 27. Having to tell my brother that our father had died was the hardest thing I have ever done. I was 19 and he was 22. On the way to his house, I never once thought about my nephew being there. My brother had struggled with prescription substance addiction up until the day his son was born. As soon as I opened the door, he was standing there holding his little boy, and all I could do was take my nephew into another room. My brother assumed he was in trouble because the chief of police, our dad's best friend, was with me. I heard him frantically insisting that he hadn't done anything wrong and hadn't left the house, as he was on house arrest at the time. I went in and just grabbed him, holding him tight, and said, "I'm so sorry, man. You didn't do anything wrong. Daddy died last night." The moment those words left my mouth, I felt the weight of them hit both of us at once. It was like being told for the first time all over again. He tried to pull away from me, but I was stronger, and we just collapsed together on the floor and cried. To think that he went from believing his own life was over to realizing our father's really was. It's a feeling I wouldn't wish on anyone. I still apologize to him for how I handled it that day, but he doesn't remember much of it. I do. Every second. Story 28. When I was 16 years old, I found out that 4 of my friends had died in a car accident, one of them being my best friend in the entire world. The summer before it happened, we were inseparable. We spent every day together, playing video games with his younger brother, who is now my best friend and like my little brother, and just living our teenage lives to the fullest. Then, something stupid happened, and we got into a fight. We didn't talk for a while after that. During school that year, we shared an auto tech class together, 5 periods straight. One day the teacher was out sick, so we had a substitute. It basically became a free 5-hour hangout session, and we spent it catching up, laughing about old memories and talking like nothing had ever come between us. Before we left that day, we promised each other that the next summer would be amazing. The next morning, my sister woke me up, saying something had happened. There had been an accident. Somehow, I knew right away it was him. She said, "Your friend was in a car accident with 3 others." I instantly knew who they were. My heart shattered before she even finished speaking. I had lost my best friend and 3 others I cared deeply about. What crushed me the most was that we had just talked the day before, just made plans for the future, and now he was gone. It was the first time I ever experienced death, and it changed me. I'm 28 now, and even after all these years, I still can't talk about that day without choking up. Story 29. I was suffering from depression and had been contemplating taking my own life. Ultimately, I decided not to, and the next day I voluntarily checked myself into a local mental hospital to get help. They told me there were no open beds except in the closed ward. I explained that I was there voluntarily and posed no danger to anyone, but they encouraged me to stay in the closed unit just for a few nights until a bed opened up elsewhere. I reluctantly agreed. The moment I saw the ward, I was terrified. The windows were so dirty that you couldn't see through them. People were screaming. Others were urinating and vomiting in the hallways. My assigned room had no window to the outside, just a window facing the nurse's station for constant surveillance. Horrified, I told the doctor no, that I couldn't stay there. That's when a large male nurse pushed a chair in front of the door and sat down. The doctor said coldly, "I'm afraid we can't let you leave." I protested. I had come willingly, and my parents, who I lived with, could vouch that I was never alone. I gave them the numbers of my therapist and psychiatrist, but the doctor refused to call. It was evening, and she didn't want to bother her superior. I said I would call the police, but she warned me that they wouldn't help. She told me I could speak to a judge after 72 hours, and only then would someone decide if I could go home or stay for however long they deemed necessary. I felt completely crushed. I collapsed on the bed and cried. The male nurse gave me an Ativan tablet, which dulled the panic just enough to get through the night. The next day, the doctor's superior came to see me. I explained everything to him. He was kind and apologetic, clearly embarrassed, and immediately transferred me to an open, voluntary ward. I thanked him when he left. But later, the original doctor returned and handed me a paper to sign, stating that I had been admitted voluntarily. I wasn't, I told her. I'm not signing that. You forced me to stay here. She smirked and said, if you ever want to get out of here, you'll sign it. So I did, effectively giving up any chance to hold them accountable. After being transferred, I immediately requested release. I wanted nothing more to do with that place. The experience traumatized me deeply. I had never known what it truly felt like to be trapped, to look out through barred windows and know you couldn't leave. It was humiliating and soul-crushing, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. The mental health system needs serious reform. This kind of treatment doesn't help people struggling with depression. It could drive even a stable person into despair, or worse. Story 30. While staying in a small bungalow in Costa Rica, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of movement and the glare of a headlamp in my room. Before I could react, a gun was pressed to my head and a knife dug into my ribs. The intruder didn't waste a second. He tied my wrists and ankles with my own shoelaces, reinforced my wrists with my belt, stuffed one of my socks into my mouth, and strapped my headlamp around my face to keep it in place. His voice was calm but terrifying as he repeated, "If you make a sound, I make you hurt." I lay there completely still, paralyzed by fear, listening to him rummage through my things. It felt like forever, but it must have been about 20 minutes before he finally found some cash in one of my pockets and my iPhone. Then he left. I waited a couple of minutes before hopping toward the door, still bound. I had just made it about 5 feet when he came back. He slammed the gun against my forehead and ordered me to get back on the bed. I obeyed instantly. He then slipped a pillowcase over my head, and that was the moment I truly thought I was going to die. I stayed still, listening to him move around before he finally left again. After what felt like an eternity, I worked up the courage to stand. Still tied up, still with the pillowcase over my head, I tried to shake it off, like a dog trying to shake off water. The absurdity of that image is the only thing that makes me smile about that night. Eventually, I managed to free my legs and hopped up to the main house, where one of the staff members helped untie my wrists. I was lucky. I escaped completely unharmed, except for losing a bit of cash and my phone. But I will never forget that blinding headlamp, the cold metal of that gun against my skin, and the sickening helplessness of being completely at someone else's mercy. Story 31. My most painful experience wasn't physical, it was emotional. It began with my relationship with my ex-girlfriend. We started dating one summer, and it felt like the best summer of my life. We talked constantly, laughed endlessly, and I honestly believe she was the one. We didn't see each other much because we went to different schools and lived far apart, but we made it work, or so I thought. When school started again, everything changed. Suddenly, I was her lowest priority. She stopped calling, stopped making time for me, stopped caring. Months would go by without us seeing each other, and even our online conversations became rare and cold. When we did talk, it was always about her problems, her toxic friends, her complaints, her sadness. I listened patiently, gave comfort, told her what she needed to hear. I should have left early on, but I convinced myself I was staying for love. So, I endured 2 long, miserable years of emotional neglect. I was too devoted to leave and too miserable to stay. The dull ache in my chest became familiar, a constant reminder that she didn't care the same way I did. I began to equate that pain with love itself. I convinced myself that my ability to endure her indifference was proof of my strength. I stopped expressing my emotions altogether. I thought being numb made me resilient. When we finally broke up after I started university, I felt hollow rather than heartbroken. I still remember that final moment. She looked at me and asked if I was going to be okay. I smiled and said, "No, I'm really not." Then I walked away. That was in February 2008, and honestly, I don't think I've been okay since. Not long after that, my life took another turn. I became a full-time caregiver for my grandmother, who was suffering from dementia. For 2 years, I watched the woman who raised me slowly disappear. She became forgetful, confused, and frightened of things that weren't real. She would wander all night, so I adapted my life around her. I barely slept, getting only a few hours each morning after she finally rested. I gave her her medicine, made her tea, and watched the same episodes of Midsummer Murders night after night. I gave up my job, my friends, and any sense of normalcy just to be there for her. It broke my heart to see her turn into someone else, to see the vibrant, strong woman who once raised me reduced to a fragile, anxious child. But I never gave up on her.